Have you ever been in a situation in life where in order to go forward, you first had to go backward? I think about great military commanders who've had to figure this out, that you can't advance all the time. Sometimes there's a strategic retreat so that you can regroup to advance later. Or I think of the great chess masters who know that, and I'm not one of them, so I'm just taking it on authority. I'm not very good at chess. I was told by someone this week that in baseball, if you're playing in the outfield and fly balls coming your way, that you're often taught, and someone can verify this. I wasn't a baseball player growing up, so someone can verify this, that you're taught to first step back, even if it's up there, step back to assess before you run forward. Is that true? Anyone else taught that? See some nods? Got one witness. Can I get another? All right, I got a couple witnesses. All right, it seems to be true. I don't know about any of those things really, but here's what I do know. I do know dirt roads in Michigan. That's where I grew up. And where I grew up on a very kind of like out in the middle of nowhere dirt road, not very well maintained. Every spring after the snow would melt and the ground would begin to thaw, there would be about a foot of mud on top of the road. And if you think snow and ice are hard to drive in mud, especially that much mud. It is slippery, you get pulled into ditches, you easily get stuck. And when you get stuck in that much mud, you soon discover that if you're stuck in mud and you want to go forward, that if you keep trying to go forward, you're not going to get anywhere, that if you're stuck in the mud, you got to sometimes go backward in order to get unstuck and to begin to go forward again. In this series, we've been talking about all the different ways, all the different steps in life. Fix my microphone, there we go. All the different steps in life that we take when life is good and we really want to savor the goodness of God. We want to experience the sweetness. We want to be faithful in moments when life is good. So we've talked about noticing those things and really, becoming aware of all the goodness in our life, savoring, taking those things in, not just taking them for granted, but really letting them go deep inside of us. We talked about the power of offering thanks or gratitude. We talked last week about testifying, letting other people know, sharing when God has been good to us and telling those stories. But this week it's gonna feel like we're going backward. Because this week I want to talk about how if we really want to experience the goodness of God in our lives, if we really want to savor life's sweet lemonade, then the way we do that is by sharing it, by paying some of those blessings forward to other people, which feels a lot like going backwards. I'll present this to you in an elementary school story problem format, all right? All right, so Dion's got a pitcher of lemonade, and this pitcher of lemonade will fill about 4 glasses worth of lemonade. So Dion comes to church on Sunday, and he hears this message that if life gives you lemonade, one of the ways that you can really enjoy it and find richness is by sharing it. So he goes home, and he finds someone to share a glass of lemonade with, and so how many glasses of lemonade does Dion now have? It's not a trick question, how many? Good, we got someone who can count to 3. Good, 3. I started with 4, and now I have 3. And if the whole point of this series is, when life gives you lemonade, how do you enjoy the sweetness that God gives you? How do you really enjoy the goodness of God? And the answer is, well, you give it away so you have less to enjoy. What sense does that make? Like, what kind of math is this? This is some Common Core kind of math or something, I don't know. Like, what is this all about? This weekend, I want us to see that in order to go forward, sometimes you have to go backward, and that paying our blessings forward, even though that may feel like we put ourselves in a deficit, we actually have less goodness in our lives. The opposite is true. We end up with far more goodness than we could ever imagine. And so to talk about this more in depth, we're going to look at one of the most well-known miracle stories of Jesus, the feeding of the 5,000. So well-known that I think all the gospel writers talk about it. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, 2 names for the same place. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. So why are people following him? Because they believe he's the Son of God? Not yet. They followed him, why? Because they saw these great signs. They saw him do all these healings, and they're like, there's something about this guy. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside, and he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. And when Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, one of the disciples, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. All right, so you see that wherever Jesus goes, these crowds of people come, they follow him, they find him, and they come after him because he's doing amazing things. And you think, man, what an exciting time to be alive, to live at the time of Jesus where all of these miracles are happening. It must have been incredible. And again, these people, they don't necessarily believe that Jesus is the Son of God yet, but they're amazed at all the things that he can do. And if you think not just about these crowds, these mobs of people who show up everywhere, but this is especially true for the disciples, the 12 that are a part of Jesus' inner circle. They get a behind-the-scenes look at all the exciting things that Jesus can do, and they understand a little bit more. So when Jesus tests them with this question, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? When he asks them this question, their answer should be, Jesus, we don't need money. We don't need a baker. We don't need a stinking store, because Jesus, we've got you here, and we know that if you want there to be bread enough for all these people, you can make it happen. Right, Jesus, we know what you can do. So what are you asking us where we're gonna get bread from? You are the bread of life. You can make this all happen, Jesus. But I'll spoil the story for you. That's not how they respond to this question. Philip, the one who was asked this question, answered him, well, I don't know. It would take more than a half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each person to have just a bite. And another one of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, he spoke up. And he said, well, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? You see their answer? It's not this faith-filled answer that said, Jesus, you can do anything. If you want to feed these people, feed them. We'll just be here to watch. We got a front row seat for the Jesus show here. You can do anything you want. Instead, what do they say? They say, well, we don't have enough money. We don't have enough food stores. Even if we steal this little boy's lunch, there's not enough food for everybody. Like, Jesus, there's not enough. And I think about after everything they've seen already. I mean, they've already seen Jesus turn water into wine at a wedding, keep a party going all night. They know what he can do. And so I wonder about this response. I wonder why they thought, well, there's no way through this situation. And I think it comes down to the fact that Jesus used the word we. Where shall we buy bread? I think if Jesus would have said, hey, what should I do here? They would have had no problem. I think the issue is he involved them. Where shall we buy bread? So suddenly you're thinking, we? Wait a minute, Jesus. You want us to use our money to buy bread to feed these people? You want us to dig into our picnic baskets to take the little bit of food that we have to feed these people? Jesus, we don't even like these people. We wish they'd go away. We're not trying to feed them. We're not trying to use our life savings on these people. We? And isn't that the problem for us too, as I talk about this final step in the series, that, enjoying God's sweetness in our lives. If it's just about me noticing and savoring and thanking and telling other people about it, fine. But if I now have to take what I have, what God has given me, and I've got to share that with other people, if I've got to be a part of God's provision, and if God wants to do miracles and pour out goodness in other people's lives, great. But if I have to be a part of that, if that's going to cost me something, if that's going to inconvenience me, it feels like that's going backward instead of going forward. But in spite of their objections, Jesus, he is undeterred. He's going to teach them something, and hopefully we learn something from this too. Jesus said, have the people sit down. And there was plenty of grass in that place. another word, a way of saying that they're in the middle of nowhere, right? There's plenty of grass in that place. And they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. This would not be counting women and children. Jesus then took the loaves, these 5, dinner roll size loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. When they had eaten enough, or enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. This is the guy we've been waiting for." And Jesus, knowing that as a result of this miracle, they intended to come and make him king by force, he withdrew again to a mountain by himself. I want to share with you some takeaways from this powerful miracle story, the feeding of the 5,000. The first thing is, I want you to notice that Jesus never abdicated responsibility. The disciples were really off-put by this we thing. We don't have a lot of food, and here's 5 loaves and 2 fish, and we could use that to feed ourselves, but Jesus, how are we supposed? Jesus never abdicated responsibility. He never took himself out of the center of the action. Yes, he involved the disciples. He invited them to be a part of this miracle, but he never stepped out. He never said, "You know what, figure it out, don't call me." He didn't say that. And the same thing is true with us as we wrestle with this idea that God is inviting us to share the goodness that we have in our lives with other people. It's not like Jesus is saying, "Hey, this is all on you. I'm stepping out of this. Figure it out yourself." He's inviting us to be involved, but he's never removing himself from the picture either. Second, this is amazing to me that Jesus gave thanks. Did you see that? Takes these 5 barley loaves and these 2 fish, and before he does the miracle, he gives thanks. I want you to think about this for a second. The God of the universe, Jesus, the one through whom everything in creation was made. It's all his. And yet he pauses before the miracle and he gives thanks. Think about just how profound that is, that Jesus, the one who is rightly owed all thanks and praise, pauses to give thanks. We've talked about this a couple of weeks ago, that giving thanks isn't just about etiquette. When we live with a thankful mindset, and this thanks was given even before the miracle happened, right? In advance of the miracle, Jesus was giving thanks. When we give thanks, when we live with a gratitude mindset, we get to see more fully the presence and the power of God at work in the world around us. If Jesus can pause and give thanks, how much more can and should we if we really want to experience more of the goodness of God? Here's the other takeaway. Everyone was satisfied. So we go from this moment where we say 5 loaves and 2 fish. This is not enough for everyone to have a little bit. And yet everyone was satisfied. And you think about all these poor peasants. That's what a lot of the people were following Jesus. People who hadn't had a good meal in months. Suddenly they sit down and they eat more. They're more satisfied than they had been in a long, long time. But it's not just them, it's also the disciples, these disciples who were so afraid of sharing, because if we share, we're just gonna raise the level of misery. Everyone's gonna be hungry. No one's gonna be satisfied. It doesn't make any sense for us to share the limited amounts of goodness that we have with everyone else, and yet they too were satisfied. Their bellies were full. Not only were their bellies full though, so were their hearts. Because at the end of this, they got to see a miracle happen. They got to be a part of a miracle happening. No tricks, no David Copperfield stuff behind, the curtain stuff. They were in it. They saw the authenticity of this miracle. And so not only were their bellies satisfied, but their hearts were satisfied too. And not only the disciples, but all the people, because you notice the people, they saw this miracle and they go, okay, now we know we're dealing with someone really important here. And they're ready to go storm the Capitol, throw out the king, install Jesus as the new king by force. And Jesus has to go like, that's not my gig. That's not what I'm trying to do here. Finally, there were leftovers. And I love this, that there were not just a little bit of leftovers. Everyone ate until they were satisfied. And then there were baskets collected. How many baskets full of leftovers? Do you remember? 12. Now, there's a lot of theories about why 12. Like that's a very specific number, and why 12. And there are lots of theories. For me, the simplest explanation is connected to how many disciples there were. How many disciples were there? 12. Yeah, 12. And so these guys who were worried about there not being enough for them to have lunch that day, that they would go hungry, Jesus, after the miracle, sends them each away with a big old doggy bag. Right, they ate to their fill, and it's kind of like rubbing it in. You thought there wouldn't be enough? Here, take some leftovers home for your family. Instead of depleting them, which is what we think, right? If we share the goodness of God with other people in our life, instead of depleting them, they actually ended up more. They were enriched. Let me just be really clear here. If the disciples would have done the normal human thing, the thing that I'm tempted to do, the thing that we're all tempted to do, if they would have taken those 5 loaves and those 2 fish, and they would have split them up amongst the 12 of them and told everyone else to get lost, like, get out of here, we're not trying to feed you, go figure it out for yourself, and everyone would have ended up with less, including the disciples, if they would have kept the goodness for themselves. Right? If they would have taken those 5 loaves and those 2 fish and divided them up amongst the 12 of them, there would have been less food, certainly less joy at being able to see a miracle, one of the greatest miracles Jesus did. Not only that, but there would be less confidence in the power of God to supply. They would have missed out on seeing what God can do. In our minds, we say, if I hold on to the goodness, if I keep the goodness for myself, then there's more. And yet, to go forward, sometimes you have to go backwards, really, in order to experience the fullness of God. Sometimes we have to be willing to do the thing that feels like less. Here at Pathfinder, we've been teaching something for quite a while called the generosity journey. And we developed this years ago, primarily to talk about financial generosity, that we are all on this journey somewhere. And the point of this is to encourage us to keep taking next steps on our journey. I want you to think about this today as I kind of unpack this again for you. This might be new for some of you it's not. Every time I revisit this, something good happens in me. I get a recalibration of what life in the kingdom of God is actually like, and a calling that sharing is actually not going to deplete me, but sharing is actually a way that I find abundance. So whether this is new for you or not, I want you really to take this in. But I also want you to think beyond financial generosity. And if you've been with us throughout this series, I want you to think about all of the goodness of God. Whatever it is in your life that you say, this is good. This is the sweetness of God in my life. Maybe it's family or other relationships. Maybe it's your work. Maybe it's your health. Whatever it is. Wherever you see the goodness of God in your life, I want you to think about that, and I want you to think about what it means to be generous with that goodness. So the generosity journey starts off over here with what we call impulse giving. I'm generous when I feel moved or I see a compelling opportunity that needs my help. The bottom line is we are all generous. It just depends on how frequently we're generous. And we believe that the Spirit of God is at work in our lives. And so if the Spirit of God is at work in us, there will be moments where the Spirit of God nudges you to do something generous. The Spirit of God will say, hey, here's an opportunity for you to share some of the goodness. And the natural human reaction is to say, but wait a minute, if I share this, am I going to be at a deficit? right? I could share, and that might be the right thing to do, but is that actually gonna cost me something? Is that gonna decrease my joy? A few weeks ago, I'm not sure which of our other pastors mentioned Sean Acor. He used to teach at Harvard, and he did a lot of studying on generosity. And one of the experiments that they ran, this is one of my favorite experiments of all time. I think about it all the time. They brought in a bunch of people, and they asked them to measure their level of happiness. Like, how full is your cup? Scale of 1 to 10, and everyone kind of marked it. And then for each of the participants, they gave them, I don't know if it was $10 or $20, and they said, here you go, here's $10, let's just say $10. And for half the people, they said, take this $10 and spend it on yourself. Treat yourself, right? Do something nice. Go buy yourself a lunch or a coffee or something fun. And so people were like, great, $10, I get to do something good for myself. And they went off and they did the good thing for themselves. The other half of the group, they gave them the $10 and they said, you know what? Use this to be kind, to bless, to take care of someone else. Do something nice for someone else in your life. At the end of the day, they had them all take a post-test. And they said, now how full is your cup? And you know where this is going, right? Guess which group had greater levels of joy and satisfaction and happiness and contentment at the end of the day? The group that spent money on themselves or the group that shared with other ones? Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, like, we know that's the answer. That seems like the right answer. It's hard for us to believe that that's actually real, that that's actually true. And maybe you're sitting here thinking, well, that's easy because it wasn't their money to begin with. Right? If that's now my $10 and I'm $10 poorer, then I don't know about that. Years ago at our first church, Jocelyn and I, we took a generosity impulse challenge. And I don't know if this is something we heard about or something we made up, but I know that in my life, I was trying to overcome some of my scarcity thinking because I grew up in a household where there was a lot of scarcity. We have a friend here now in St. Louis, and we'll go out for an expensive meal, and you kind of get the check, and you're like, ooh, that was a lot. You know what I mean? Like, that was good, and that was fun, but dang, that was a lot of money. You have those moments. You're like, and she'll always say, hey, that was fun and it was worth it. And after all, you're not gonna lose the house over it, right? And that's her framing for it. And I appreciate that. But then in the back of my mind, I think, yeah, but the way I grew up, I mean, that kind of meal would maybe, because we had moments where we thought we were gonna lose our house or our utilities were shut off. And so for me, I grew up with all this scarcity thinking, just being so afraid that if I didn't manage money really, really well, that it was gonna hurt my family or it was gonna cost us, that we'd lose our house or wouldn't be able to pay our bills. And so early on at our last church, Jocelyn and I thought, what if for a week we take this impulse challenge, this generosity impulse challenge, and every time we feel called to be generous, for like godly reasons, because we can be generous for the wrong reasons, if we were trying to show off or we're trying to like win someone's favor or approval, we're trying to buy someone's love. Those are the wrong reasons. But if we just are feeling called by God, by the Spirit of God, if we feel this impulse to be generous, what if instead of wrestling with it, fighting against it, doing the math on it, what if we just say yes and we do that for an entire week? Let's see what happens. I don't know why we decided to do this, but it was terrifying for me. It was terrifying. I'm like, what? We are gonna go broke. Now at the end of the week, we didn't go broke. Actually, what I discovered is, although I think of myself as a person who has lots of generous impulses, I didn't have that many during that week. There were some, but I guess I'm less generous than in heart than I think. But as we responded to those impulses, not only did we have enough to pay our bills, but at the end of the week, we were so filled with joy at being able to bless other people. It was so much fun. But most of all, for me, I got to see that, hey, you know what? When you share, not only does it fill your cup with joy, but really there's enough. God provides. It increased my confidence in God. See, reason says, if you're in the Harvard study or you're running the generosity impulse challenge that Jocelyn and I did, that participants who hold on should have been richer, right? If you spend the money on yourself or you keep it for yourself, you should be richer. Just like the disciples thought on the hillside that day. If we keep this for ourselves, we will be richer. If we share, we're gonna be poorer. But the reality is everything in life gets richer when we follow these impulses to give it away. Hey, if you're tracking, don't worry, I'm not gonna spend that much time on all 4 of these, okay? Impulse. Next is intentional giving, and I think this is the hardest step for us to take, intentional giving. I'm generous on a regular basis to a few causes close to my heart based on what I can afford to give. And the reason this is the hardest step is because impulse, that's one thing, but intentional giving means you've got to have a commitment, you've got to make a plan, you've got to stick to it, and that's hard to do. In the world of faith, some of us may actually see this as unspiritual. Like, I don't need to plan. I've heard preachers say this, like, I don't get up and plan anything for my message. I just let the Spirit move me. You wouldn't want to hear one of those sermons from me. Trust me. In most things in life, I mean, if you want to get healthy, you don't just follow your impulses and say, I'm gonna go to the gym when I feel like it. Maybe if we were really good at listening to the Spirit of God, that would work fine. But for most things in life, you gotta make a commitment, you gotta make a plan. And so intentional generosity means if I can create a disciplined generosity plan of how I'm gonna pay forward the goodness of God in my life, weekly or monthly, if I can do that, it will begin to transform my life. The Harvard study, that increased my well-being that day if I did the right thing with it. Intentional giving is about how do I take moment by moment good feels, good vibes, and how do I actually make that a way of life? Recently, not talking about financial giving here, but in the last couple of years, I became more and more convicted that I needed to get better at sharing my time and my expertise with other nonprofits in St. Louis. So I've learned a lot here. I've been really blessed to be in leadership here. And my life is incredibly busy. I was telling someone last night that I don't have any hobbies because I work and then I really try to devote myself to my family, and I don't really have any hobbies. Nothing else fits in my life. Those are my focal points. And so I deal with the scarcity of time a lot, but a couple of years ago I thought, it's time for me to give back to St. Louis. And so I got on a couple of nonprofit boards that serve at-risk people, kids and families, people in behavioral health crisis. Recently, I took on a role of chairman for one of the boards. And you can ask Jocelyn this, every week that I've got a board meeting, I'm like so mad about it. I'm like, I do not have time for this. My life is way too busy. Like, I got way too many other issues to deal with. I don't have time for these other issues. And yet what I'm discovering, what I'm believing is just like with my money, and I'll talk about that in a minute, with my time, with my gifts, the other things in my life that I know are good gifts from God, if I don't have a plan intentionally to share those things, to pay those things forward, then I'm gonna miss out on transformation in my life. That I'm gonna miss out on miracles, that I'm gonna miss out on seeing the provision, the power of God in my life. So what would it look like for you to become more intentional? Maybe that's a step you need to take. Then we're gonna talk about courageous giving. This says, I'm generous in giving back to God my tithe, the first 10% of all my income, trusting Him to use it for good and to provide for all of my needs. Study after study have shown, when you ask like Americans, how much more money would you need in order to feel comfortable? And you ask most, there are some brackets who it's a bigger number, but most Americans, if you say, how much more money would you need to be able to feel like you got enough saved, you're a little more comfortable, you're a little more at peace, consistently over decades, the answer has been about 10% more. I'm almost there. If I just had about 10% more, then I think I'd be comfortable, then I'd be at peace. Just imagine flipping that whole narrative on its head for a minute and saying, you know what, I know everything in me says that if I just had 10% more, then I'd be comfortable, then I would have peace, then my lemonade glass would be overflowing. But I'm gonna push back on that. Instead, I'm gonna see what it's like to live with 10% less. That's what courageous giving is about when we talk about financial generosity. The tithe literally is 10%. When we say tithing, we mean 10%. If you say tithe and you say I give 2%, you're actually using the word wrong. It's okay, we all use words wrong, but the word means 10%. But think about how powerful it would be if we flipped that cultural narrative on its head that said, you know what, my life isn't quite full, my cup isn't full yet. If I had 10% more, it would be full. Imagine what could happen if we start to say, you know what, no, I've got plenty. 10% less is actually, so I can share more. 10% less would actually make my life fuller than 10% more. And then finally, fearless giving. I'm generous beyond 10% of my income because I'm obsessed with seeing God at work around me, and I know I can't outgive him. I'll just be honest, I've been kind of in this, Jocelyn and I have been kind of in this courageous giving thing. We've been tithers for a long time. During certain seasons when the church calls upon us, we'll give a little more, and so we do that. I've wanted to try to find a way to become a fearless giver because I've seen some people like this in my life. And I'm becoming more and more convinced that maybe this is just a phase of life thing. Right now, as I'm trying to get my kids through college, like maybe here's the right place for me to be. But I'll tell you what, I really aspire and hope that as I age, as my kids grow up and leave the house, I really hope I can move against what is the common narrative in the Western world, which says that as you get more time, you spend more time on yourself. As you get more money because you're not paying for your kids, you can do nicer things for yourself. I want to do nice things in my life, but I hope that as I age, my deeper desire becomes, as I have more time, as I have more margin, as I have more financial margin, what I hope that means is that I'm excited about sharing more of what I have with others. Because I believe there's more joy and there's more abundance and more faith to be found, right? To go forward, you have to go backward. And so I believe there's more joy and abundance to be found, not when we hold back, but when we give. In closing, I just want you to go back to that mountainside, the day that Jesus did his miracle. Can you imagine what it was like to be in the crowd that day? Sitting there with Jesus in his presence, within sight of Jesus. Some of us freak out when we see our favorite artist perform at the Hollywood Casino Amphitheater. Like, imagine being on a mountainside with Jesus. And imagine hearing his voice and hearing teaching from the scriptures, from the mouth of Jesus himself. Can you imagine what that must have been like? And then can you imagine being just a hungry person and miraculously being fed past the point of satisfaction, knowing that it was a miracle? There's no way that could happen. Can you imagine what it must have been like to be there that day? But even more, can you imagine what it must have been like to be a disciple of Jesus that day? To know behind the scenes what they had when they started and what they ended with. 5 loaves and 2 fish, 12 baskets full of bread. Can you imagine how that changed them for the rest of their lives? To be a part of the miracle and to see that often in life, when we're thinking about abundance, we have to go backward before we can go forward. That's why there is no better response for us when we are moving forward, trying to really take in the goodness of God. There's no better response, final response for us, than to take what we're given and to share it. Which brings us to our weekly challenge for this week. No matter where you are on the generosity journey, here's what I'm gonna encourage you to do this week. This is fun. Look for an opportunity to pay it forward at a drive-through or store. You know what I mean? You're in the line and you're like, hey, what's the next person getting? I wanna pay for their thing. And I want you, when you do this, not to worry about what happens externally. The person may be awkward, they may not thank you. Pay only attention to what happens internally, the fruit of the Spirit in your life. And just observe that often we find greater abundance when we're willing to share. Let's pray. God in heaven, I thank you so much that you are a God of abundance. And I thank you for every good gift that you've put into my life. Lord, I'm thankful that Jesus himself is the model, that to go forward, you have to go backward. To go up, you have to go down. And I'm thankful that Jesus did not keep his precious life to himself, but he came down and shared his life with us. He shared his life even on a cross. And Lord, as we think about the cross and the tomb, and we think about all that Jesus offered there, and then we think about what happened after it, Lord, please remind us that when we're offering ourselves, that we'll never be depleted, but instead, you have a way of filling us up. So Lord, give us faith to not only see the goodness in our lives all around us, but Lord, give us faith to be willing to share it, knowing that when we share the goodness that you've entrusted us with, that we won't be depleted, but we'll only be made full. God, I pray for a revival of generosity in this church, that everyone who interacts with us would just see your heart, see your love, would see your abundance through us in a new way. And Lord, I pray that you would continue to fill our cups. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you for joining us and being a part of our online Pathfinder community.
If you're new here, you can find helpful links to resources in the description below or at pathfinderstl.org.
Yes, and while you're there, you can also find our message podcasts, which allow you to listen to the weekend message on the go. So whatever you're doing, wherever you are, you'll never miss out on a message from us.
It's pretty great. And if you found this message or the series helpful in any way, shape, or form, share it, bless others, and remind them about how good God is in our life. And while you're at it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like, and comment. Every interaction helps with the message of Jesus.
And finally, if you'd like to support our ministry with a gift, you can do so at pathfinderstl.org/giving. It is truly your generosity that fuels our work here at Pathfinder Church.
Well, I think that's all from us. We hope that you have a wonderful time worshiping with us this morning and have a blessed week.